All right, hello everybody. Today is January 26th, 2023. This is the Kubernetes SIG architecture meeting. And I guess time to get started. So thanks all for coming today. And we have first item on our agenda is Rob.
Hey everyone. Yeah, I've got a doc that's talking about a proposal, at least, to phase out beta from Gateway API. We've discussed this on SIGNet and SIGArch mailing list previously, as well as in Gateway API community meetings. It seems like there has been support, but I really wanted to get SIGArch perspective here, because I recognize if we were to do this, it would be, I think, the first time a Kubernetes API had existed without that intermediate API version. I'll try and explain the reasoning. I don't know, maybe can I share?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay.
I think I have to make you co-host.
Yeah. Okay. Hopefully everyone can see that. Yeah, so, as we've been thinking about beta and API versioning in general in Gateway API, we've been trying to make sense of how we go GA. We have beta, we have met our graduation criteria to become a GA API, but we have been questioning, do we really need these layers, all three of these API versions? As I think one of the first major Kubernetes APIs that is CRD based and not in tree, we have some somewhat unique release versioning and other processes. And one of our considerations is that every API version we introduce incurs significant cost. So when we introduce a new API version, in this case beta, we're maintaining separate type definitions for every piece of generated code. There's as far as I can tell, the best way to introduce an API version involves 4 releases, where we're going through different stages of served, storage, and deprecated states for each API version. And then, at some point, we need to go through the pain of deprecating API versions, which is especially painful, as we've all experienced. Gateway API being kind of the natural successor of the Ingress API before it, we're very familiar with the pain caused by deprecating Ingress API. And I know these are not parallel things, not exactly the same thing, but all of these implementations, we have more than 15 implementations of this API, I think, would all need to go through separate deprecation processes for each version of the API we remove. And this pain extends not just to maintainers, but implementers and users themselves. So the argument or proposal that I'm making is that instead of this, we should simply offer 2 states, a not enabled by default and not stable, and enabled by default and stable, and not have an intermediate state that is effectively on by default. I know that's changing upstream or has changed in upstream, but not completely stable. That does not provide a lot of value to us in Gateway API. And so my argument is that we should simply have the 2 states. There's more in this doc, but maybe I'll open it up for discussion before I go too much further.
Do you see a distinction between something that gets added on to a cluster? You talked about the lifecycle difference, where it's CRD based. You have to actually choose and opt in to install this thing, and KK itself.
Yeah, that's a fair point. This does feel a bit unique because this is a thing that this is a set of APIs that users are opting into. In most cases, they, because they're CRDs, users have some level of control that they don't have with built-in Kubernetes APIs. One example that I highlighted, I think later on in this doc, is if we were to remove a CRD or deprecate a CRD entirely, users can still install it. Implementations can, we can't prevent an API from existing. It can still be installed in a cluster. So there are some very real differences when we're working with CRDs. I'm taking silence as a generally good thing, but if anyone is seeing this and saying, no, I really want to avoid that, then that's great. Go ahead, Tim.
So, I mean, Rob, we've talked about this, and I published my own thing around about the same time, proposing this same idea sort of writ large. I have some follow-up work to do to see if I want to push forward with that and try to justify it. But you all over in Gateway Land have been so gracious about being our guinea pigs for so many things. I am, for one, perfectly happy to let you be the guinea pig for this too.
I appreciate that support. Yeah, especially it feels like with CRDs there are these additional costs, and I was trying to draw a parallel with upstream APIs of the on by default and off by default analogies, but it's a little trickier with CRDs because it's not really clearly on and off by default. We're just providing different stability levels and letting users choose what they use. So given that, I'm really struggling to see that beta provides significant value. Jordan?
Yeah, I was just gonna sort of echo what you just said. Like the fact that someone can take an alpha CRD and layer it onto an existing cluster and then try using it and then delete it and clean up all the objects. And it's sort of a, not no risk, but it's a very lightweight way to try something out. Like it's much easier to try a CRD while it's in alpha state. To me, the question seems to be about like how willing would the project, I guess Gateway in this case, how willing would they be to disrupt things that had integrated with the beta API? And if there would be a lot of reluctance to do that, it's sort of something for like Gateway where the value is in the integrations. It seems like opposing goals to say like we want to get lots and lots of feedback, so we're going to encourage people to integrate with this, but then we're also going to say everything you integrate with a beta API is not long-term stable. Like that seems very difficult to say both of those things with a straight face. And so if the posture of the Gateway project is that like once we've gotten enough experience to think that we can support this API, the shape of the API is going to work long term, and people start integrating with it, we're going to be very reluctant to break them. That sounds like stable. That sounds like V1. Like we're encouraging integrations at this point. We're not planning to break those integrations. If we made changes in the future, we would keep supporting these current integrations. That sounds like stable to me.
Yeah, those are really helpful clarifications. And I agree. I mean, this is an API that is very broadly implemented, and we've already built community consensus and documented community consensus that the changes from beta to GA are very, very minimal, and we will make every intent to, not make any significant changes between those API versions. So the variation between,
are the changes ones that would be compatible, like additive? That okay. Yeah, that's good.
So I mean, it seems like we've already put ourselves in a position where beta just isn't adding us any value. But John?
Yeah, well, I'll preface this to say that I was out for a while, so I haven't actually read all the documents, so I'm going on what the discussion is here. But I think that a little bit echoing what Jordan said, right? Like, I think that there's, if you think about it, and you kind of structured your document this way a little bit too, like there's a couple different stakeholders, right? There's the users. The idea of the versioning is to protect a couple different stakeholders. One is to protect the users, one is to protect the maintainers, one is to protect uh, the people who support clusters that are deployed out there. And maybe in the case of an integration like this, it's to support the implementers of those specific APIs. So like that's kind of the maintainers, but in this case, they're not the same people maintaining the API that are implementing it. So I think it makes sense to me that's why the versioning scheme is there. But in this case, the CRD ability to add and remove CRDs protects the user already. So the versioning isn't as critical there. And the implementers, it's clear that they don't see value in the beta, right? For the reasons you just said. So it's not really protecting them to have a three-tier structure. So similarly, I think from a cloud provider perspective or a cluster administrator perspective, I think that likely the ability that it's a CRD and you can add and remove is probably somewhat protective there as well. I haven't thought that through, but so generally speaking, I think that if you go back to why we have the versioning scheme and who it's protecting from what, I think the CRD mechanism is sufficient in this case with the two-stage. So to me, it makes sense what you're saying. That's the short of it.
Thanks.
I believe it's Mo.
Go ahead, Mo. Yeah.
So I was going to ask, so today you have the alpha, beta, GA phases. Do you feel like if you had gone back in time and not had the beta phase, that you would have gotten the adoption and feedback if you had purely stayed in alpha?
I think so. So it's a good question. We stayed in alpha for a long time with this API. I want to say 2 years almost. We had a V1 Alpha 1. We got a lot of feedback. We made significant changes, had a V1 Alpha 2. V1 Alpha 2 changed to V1 Beta 1 with no changes. And we expect V1 Beta 1 to change to V1 with no changes again. I mean, there have been some additions to the API, but no changes beyond that. So I think, we're very informed that this community is largely made up of implementers of the API at this point, that the people designing the API are also implementing it. And most of them are coming from the Ingress perspective of having dealt with version compatibility and pain points along that upgrade path. And so there's a strong preference to avoid that going forward.
Okay. The other thing I wanted to ask about, and I know we chatted about this a little bit offline, are there aspects of the Kubernetes kept process, such as like the PRR review or subset of it, that could be applied here to help, maybe purely as a way of helping answer questions when it comes time for some future alpha API to go straight to GA, that those things have been thought through?
Yeah, I think that is a good idea. So much of the PRR does not seem to apply here, but I think there are at least pieces that do, and we should incorporate that. And for context, this is a bit of a discussion on graduation criteria. We currently have defined graduation criteria for beta and GA in the API, and this doc proposes merging those requirements together. And I think one of the most significant bits of criteria to leave alpha is that we have complete conformance test coverage and multiple implementations that are conformant. So I think, in my opinion, that helps alleviate concerns about production readiness if we have multiple implementations that are passing conformance tests and have clearly tested this out. But I agree that there's probably some aspects of PRR that we can pull in as well.
Well, I will just say, I don't think the graduation criteria, we're not talking about relaxing graduation criteria for GA, right? So in that sense, if you're making the jump, or future thing is making the jump from alpha to GA, they still have to meet all the same graduation requirements that they would meet in beta and GA. So that's not something that would, at the face of it, concern me. As far as PRR, I mean, I think that reviewing those questions is always helpful. I don't, given that the implementations are all different, it's a little bit more challenging to apply them on the API. They don't really apply to the API, they apply to the implementations.
Yeah,
agreed.
maybe a closing thought on what I was asking is, so I feel like a lot of maybe the confidence or maybe lack thereof of hesitation on some of this, it is because that we're talking about something that's a CRD, and maybe what that means is that in core we should think about more CRD based things, because if the reason why we really want alphas and betas and everything's and enablement by default and not enablement by default is because it's so tightly controlled and coupled with a particular Kubernetes version and all that stuff, maybe there's some other discussion or thoughts there. But I think I've had my fill. I think David, you were up.
Yeah, I was going to say that I do see, I asked the question, and I also do see a significant distinction between a CRD that you can add to any supported Kubernetes level and the KK repo itself. But I want to look back at maybe a couple APIs that we developed that did have significant changes beta to GA. One of them was the admission webhook configuration API, where we actually changed default values significantly. I think we actually changed one from like false to true, which was a significant change that bit some people. And then the CRD API itself, which actually changed the way the entire object was shaped as it evolved from beta to GA. And I think my question would be, how would we, if we made a general rule and it did encompass KK, even if it didn't encompass KK, just CRDs, how are we going to do a better job in the future? Like, how would we have done a better job finding that in alpha instead of finding it when we went to stable?
Yeah, that's a fair question. A very good question. With Gateway API, we've been fortunate to get reasonably good feedback and usage with our alpha APIs. Part of, one of the things I didn't really cover here is we have a concept of release channels with our CRDs. So you can, install the experimental release of any CRD or the stable release. And so because, again, these are CRDs, it is relatively low cost to experiment with an experimental feature by installing experimental CRDs. That has helped get feedback on alpha API features and versions. And it's certainly not perfect, and I would agree that I don't know how this translates to upstream APIs, but I think for CRDs it is easier to get feedback at alpha versions.
I agree with that, and I think I'd like to put the same question I just asked to Tim. I heard him on the call because Tim's I think you want a similar track for KK based on the email I read a while back. If you're talking, you're on mute.
You're muted. Yep. Still mute.
Can't hear you, Tim.
I promise I was not trying to do this to you.
How's about now?
There you go.
Perfect.
Yes. Cool. Jordan, do you mind if I jump to Q and answer?
No, go for it.
All right. Yes. So I started writing about this. I'll paste a link to the doc in the chat in just a minute. I'm not ready to really have the argument yet about KK because there's a lot of good feedback that I need to incorporate and synthesize. I agree fundamentally with the proposition that Rob's making here, right? Which is beta, or at least my interpretation of it, my extension of it is beta provides us relatively little value, provides our users relatively little value. It's effectively GA with lower quality. We should just accept that, call it that, and adjust our product development lifecycle around that. The questions you're asking, David, are really good questions. How do we get feedback? I don't think the existence or non-existence of beta actually makes a difference there. By the time we put something out in beta and turn it on by default, we have effectively locked in the defaults and the schema, and any change we make in beta, between beta and GA to those things is excessively painful. And I don't think we can afford to do it as a project at this point. So how do we get good feedback early on? That I do not have great answers to yet.
So extending that out, then would we have said that we would have been unable to fix CRDs to support versioning because we had shipped a beta level that didn't have a schema that supported that? Or would we have found a way?
I don't know the details of that particular change. We do still support API versions, right? We do support in general the ability to change defaults across API versions. So you could have just gone to V1 with a piss poor product and then gone to V2 straight away with the got it right this time thing. The distinction being, once we put it out there in beta and we get people using it, it's really hard and impactful to pull the rug out from underneath them.
Okay. Can I request that as you explore the idea, you look at those two APIs in particular? Validating admission webhooks and CRDs both had significant changes, beta to GA, and they were painful. You are correct. They were painful.
Yep. And I mean, the short answer is, I'll make this my last word on it. The short answer is we should have found those in what I would call preview, not in beta when it was on by default. The question then becomes, how do we get people to use previews and when they're off by default, right? We've got managed cloud providers, we got representatives from them here. How would I convince GKE to enable preview gates, which are effectively sort of a mix of alpha and beta on their users' clusters? That's a tall order, right? It's a big ask, but if we don't get feedback, then those sorts of things will never be found. So we've got to find an answer, but I don't think that's a problem that we're avoiding today anyway. Like, a lot of beta stuff just isn't getting feedback. Beta APIs being off by default now means beta and alpha are effectively the same thing. Thanks. I posted the link to the doc in the comments here. Anybody who hasn't read it, please go through and read it and shoot holes in it. I will circle back to it sort of after KEP time when I have some more brain power.
Thanks.
I think you're up, Jordan.
I'll be quick so we can move on. I was just going to say, beta sort of being this weird like GA but lower quality, I kind of agree with. And if we want to get rid of beta, you can either push that one way or the other. You can say like, oh, that lower quality, we're not quite sure about this aspect. That's going to live in alpha, and we're just going to stay alpha and iterate until we can like show feedback. And I think that's what Gateway API did. And that's encouraging to see. Like the idea that the alpha would like iterate and get feedback and change and wait until it could be promoted without changes. That's a pattern I like to see. So
but I think, Jordan, that is specifically enabled by the fact that it's a CRD-based API.
sure,
I don't
but
think you could do
that
that easily
pattern,
with a VPA.
that pattern is what I would
Yeah.
want to see from anyone who was trying to make the argument that, oh, we can get rid of beta because it's not giving us useful signal. Like,
Right.
get rid of beta and therefore go straight to GA without signal.
Not a good idea.
That seems not great. The other thing, to David's point, I think CRD is actually started in beta, and a lot of their initial beta shape was informed by third-party resource compatibility. Like, third-party resources didn't have a schema, and so it's like, well, I guess we can't require a schema.
It was a tricky situation. There were a
So-
couple aspects to it. It did
Yeah.
come in, start there in beta, in part because of that, also in part because of the GKE requirement of no alpha APIs. So it was, well, I got to have a replacement for this thing. So it came in as beta.
Yeah. So yeah, it's good to be informed by history. I think some of the things that we caught in CRD between beta and GA, like the first beta of CRD was probably like actually alpha. So hopefully we wouldn't repeat that mistake. I don't know. All right, we can move on.
Great. Thanks for all the good feedback.
So Rob, do you have what you need out of this? Do you feel you've gotten enough feedback? Are there other open questions you have?
I am going to take this as agreement to move forward. But if I should not, let me know. I'll send something out on the mailing list just for anyone who wants to have any hesitation, they can say it. But otherwise, I think we'll move forward with this.
Sounds good to me. All right, thank you. All right, let me see. I guess I'm the one. Let's check the agenda. Next, Liggett. Discussion of Go update KEP.
All right, I have a KEP I can show if I can share my screen, maybe.
Yeah, let's see if I can figure that out.
That's funny. Apparently that's not going to work. If you don't mind pulling up the KEP, it's linked from the agenda, and there's the link. Sorry about that.
Yeah, 1 sec. Yeah.
So just to give a little bit of background, this has been a topic we've talked about literally for years under many different contexts. It's come up when we were talking about the annual support cycle for Kubernetes releases, extending support from 9 months to 12 months. It came up when we were talking about long-term support, the idea that it felt disingenuous or silly to say, oh yeah, we can support a Kubernetes version for like a year or 2 years or 5 years when it was built on top of a Go version that was out of support after 8 months. And if you switch to the Markdown view, this will be way easier to read. Yep.
Okay. I got to remember how to do that in here.
On the right.
Yeah.
Right there.
Oh, why did it do that? There we go.
And so if you jump to the motivation, for those who don't know, the Go project releases a new version every 6 months. They support the last 2 minor versions with security fixes. So that gives a year of support for any given Go minor version. We pick up that as quickly as we can on Kubernetes, usually within a month or 2 or 3, depending on alignment with Kubernetes release cadences and if there were any regressions in the Go version that we find and have to get fixes for, which means that by the time we actually ship a Kubernetes version, there might be like 8 months of support left on that Go minor version. And we now support a given Kubernetes minor version for 12 to 14 months. So that leaves a gap at the end where if there's a Go vulnerability, it's not going to be available on the Go minor version that we're building our patch releases from. So the obvious solution would just be to update our release branches to new Go minor versions, but that has usually not been possible because of behavior changes in new Go minor versions. So if you scroll down, I listed a few of them. Sometimes they're behavior changes, sometimes they're they just require a lot of build changes or pretty disruptive changes. Anyway, there's a variety of examples, but the short version was we couldn't consistently update our release branches to new Go versions and keep our release branches behavior compatible and low risk. And so over the last few years, we've been talking to the Go team about this, saying we would love to stay up to date, but we can't for these reasons. Can you maybe support Go versions longer, or like stop making behavioral changes, or can you help us out here? And they really took that to heart. And so I had linked to a discussion in the Go project and a proposal, which was just accepted this last week, which is to have a compatibility mode in Go releases, so that if you build a module like Kubernetes and your module says, I build with Go 119, even if you build that with Go 120 or 121 or 122, it will see, oh, you wanted Go 119 behavior, and any changes that they've made that they knew could be impactful will follow the 119 behavior. So there's a commitment to put compatibility switches around changes in new Go minor versions, and to honor the behavior of the module that you're building. Yeah, Tim.
Oh, okay.
Never mind. My question is answered by the screen. Sorry.
I was going to ask when that starts, with what release of Go.
It was just accepted this week, and Go 121, which is being released in August of this year, will be the first version to have this capability built in.
Sorry, my question actually isn't answered by the screen. I was going to ask, are we going to go back and do like add back compatibility flags for all the examples that you listed here? Or are we saying it starts today and sorry about the past?
So some of them already had compatibility switches. So the SHA-1 support and the look path behavior already had compatibility switches. Some did not, like the parse IP changes.
Yeah, I've got a lot of code I can delete if they put us back to sane semantics there.
Yeah, so this is primarily a forward-looking thing.
How far back are they going to support this kind of
Yeah, so the proposal is to add a compatibility switch around behavior changes in a new Go minor version and support that for, I think they said 4 releases, which would be 2 years. So you could update release branches to new Go minor versions and keep runtime compatible support for an extra, I guess, 2 years. It wouldn't be quite 2 years because we pick up things, a few months later, but that would easily cover the gap for the open source support. And from what I can see, it would cover the support windows of the downstreams that are picking up Kubernetes versions and might have a few more months of support past open source end of life. Yeah, Tim.
Do I understand correctly? This is sort of monolithic. Like we get one choice. We don't get to choose on a case by case basis. Like if I choose, if I say I wanted the parse IP changes to not be changed, we would pin to 117, which means we get 117 semantics for everything.
No, it's awesome. The version of your Go module determines the defaults. So if you say my modules Go 117, then by default you get Go 117 behavior across the board. You can have fine-grained control in your main module to say, like, I want to twiddle this compatibility switch or that compatibility switch. So it's exactly what I would expect. You get sane defaults, but you also have fine-grained control if you want it. Anyway, with that on the horizon, it seems like a good chance to revisit, like now that it seems like we actually could pick up Go minor version updates on our release branches, what would our requirements be for doing that? And so the proposal is basically three parts. One is to track the changes that we made to Kubernetes in order to pick up a new Go miner version. Historically, when we bump Go miner versions, we sort of just put everything in one big PR and say, like, we made this change, made this change, made this change, and bumped Go versions. And so this is proposing to make the changes required to adopt the new Go version as prereq PRs. So we can make sure that they work with the old or existing Go version and the upcoming Go version. And so there are examples of the types of changes we normally make: tooling changes, vet or lint check fixes, things like that. So track those changes and merge them into master before we pick up the new Go version. Then the second step is to backport those prereq changes to our release branches, and those should match our risk requirements. Like, we shouldn't backport high risk things or really disruptive things. If any of those prereq changes look to be risky or disruptive, we should try to make them minimal or find alternatives that let us backport them. And then the third step is the big one. Actually update the release branches to the new Go miner versions. And I took a stab at sort of what our requirements would be. We want to avoid regressions. We want to avoid behavior changes. We want to avoid people who are using our libraries having to update their Go version to keep using the libraries on that Kubernetes miner release. And so this was just sort of an initial stab at requirements. We want to allow some time of the new Go version to get picked up by like a pretty broad community and get reports of regressions and give time for fixes. I think we should have a Kubernetes release on the new Go version before we start taking it back to older Kubernetes releases. So that gives time for people to consume our release candidates and early adopters to pick up a new, like, actual .0 Kubernetes release and run it through qualification, things like that. I put a month there. I know some providers, I can speak for GKE, like, we have our pre-prod tests passing, and like, we've been getting new versions to production in a month. So it's not necessarily super wide adoption, but it does mean that a lot of pre-prod qualification has been done in downstreams. And then the other requirements are to make sure that there's no user-facing behavior changes. There's no action required items. People using our libraries don't have to update Go versions. So that's an overview of the proposal. I wanted feedback on sort of these requirements. If there were requirements people thought we were missing, people thought these were too strict, too loose. Yeah, so I'll open it up for questions.
Well, a minor question, which, knowing you, you've probably taken care of this, but so you've got a number of little timing cycles in here, right? You've got the Go supported release versions, you've got the Kubernetes supported release versions, and then in these requirements that I'm showing on the screen now, you've got, 3 months before this and 3 months after this. Like, are we have the backward compatibility flags, but the overall Go releases still only have the year support, as I understand it. So are we sure that the timing works between getting a Kubernetes release out that has this Go version? That's months, that we do that every 4 months. You already said we're 8 to 9 months behind, and then you go 3 more versions. Are we going to be updating it to a version that's going out of support anyway? Have you done the math on that?
Yeah, we're not 8 to 9 months behind. We are usually release
pretty quickly. Yeah.
on a Go version that's like 1 to 3 months old. So it actually aligns decently well. Like, requiring a Kubernetes release and a month for feedback might push us to 4-ish months.
Okay.
This ends up getting us on, assuming no regressions that we discover and then have to push through a Go report and fix and release cycle. This gets release branches onto a new Go version while it is still the newest Go version.
Okay.
So it gets it within
In
that
6 months. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And the reason I wanted to sort of push it earlier, like 3 months and 1 month, is so that if there are issues, we have time to work through the resolution of those, and we're not like pushing up against the out of support timeframe. Yeah. Other questions?
Hi, Jordan, Dims. What does this, sorry, I'm late. What does this mean for, say, SIG release? Are we increasing their work, reducing their work, same amount of work?
I actually talked through this with the SIG release folks earlier this week. Overall, I mean, it's updating Go on older release branches, so it is some more work, but if we can actually keep all of our release branches on the same Go minor version generally, I think that overall is less work.
Right.
The main addition would be the setup of the 2 CI jobs to make sure unit and integration tests work on the original Go version for a release branch.
Okay.
So in step 3,
Okay.
that's the main change. That's like a net new thing. Go version bumps across release branches are just a thing that we already do. So doing the same bump across 2 more release branches isn't that big of a deal. So when the feedback from SIG release was to make sure this is integrated into the tooling that copies out the CI jobs,
Okay.
but there weren't particular concerns from SIG release.
And then the next question is also people oriented. Other than you and me, do we have people signed up to help do this?
Yeah, so
like we have to identify a set of people who can come and help us do this on an ongoing basis, because it's not going to be, you did it on like just before the Christmas break, right?
Yeah.
So, and
my expectation is that as the Go proposal lands in 121, it will become more and more mechanical to do this. When we made the update to Go 119 before the holidays, we were still in sort of one-off mitigation land where we had to go and fiddle with and go debug environment variables and things like that.
Right.
I think this is only reasonable to do in an ongoing way because Go will support compatibility automatically. The expectation is you build an old version with a new Go release and it should behave the same. And if it doesn't, you can open a bug against the Go team and say, hey, this started behaving differently. Please add a compatibility switch for this.
Then the other question I had was, I know we were looking at like how to make the canaries better so that we could test changes like this, with a newer Go version. Like, right now it's cumbersome to update the tooling to newer versions of Go and then try this out. So
that's a little bit orthogonal to this one. That also affects just updating master to a new Go version. So I linked to the request to improve that. If we get the improvements to that, where you can specify the Go version in the Kubernetes repo, that would be awesome. I don't think that's a prereq to this, but it would certainly make this easier.
Right. I'm just identifying things that is going to stop us from like doing this on a regular basis. And that's one of the other things.
Yeah, in terms of like doing the making this a mechanical process, I would expect you or I to be pretty involved in the next 1 or 2 of these to Go 120 and Go 121, and iron out sort of the special cases, make sure that the new Go approach is actually working as expected, and then sort of make it a process that anyone can follow.
Yeah, that sounds good. Overall, +1 from me. Let's do it. Let's try it out, and this will help everybody for sure. It's just a question of like, can we get more hands on the wheel here from the people in the room? That's the reason for asking the question.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want people to assume that somebody else will do it, right? So
Yeah, I'm all for getting more hands on the wheel. It helps if you can actually describe what those hands should be doing instead
I
of
know
look at what
exactly.
this release
Yeah.
involves and then do that. So
Right.
yeah. Okay, well, we can leave it there. And if you have more comments, feel free to jump in on the cap. And I'll be
Okay,
updating
great.
it this week with some feedback from the SIG release, and we'll go from there.
Thank you, Jordan. All right, let's see. Next item, Rian.
Yes, I'll be short. Thank you very much. Just to bring to the attention that we have brought another conformance test for the API service endpoints, 4 of those. I have already asked David and Jordan to have put some eyes on that. And when that merged in, we'll only have 3 left before we start digging out things from the ineligible list.
Okay.
Hopefully by KubeCon, we will have a theoretical 100%, and then we'll start taking things out of ineligible.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Excellent. Good
Thank you very much.
Last item, Tim.
Hey all. So in the process of reviewing KEPs and stuff, I finally reached the boiling point on the topic of we don't have a canonical list anywhere of all of the annotations and labels and things that we use across our system. We have some docs, which are good but incomplete and often forgotten, and exclusively human oriented. And so I started slapping together a mini KEP to propose that we create a repo and put some structured metadata into that repo so that at least when we see a PR or a KEP that's adding a new annotation, we can say, go put it in the database, and we can then crowdsource over time, approaching completeness. And since this meeting was on today, I thought I'd throw it on the agenda and see A, if anybody screamingly objects, and B, if anybody wants to co-sign.
I mean, it seems reasonable to me. I'm a little skeptical that it will. I think we have internally, we have something like that for like CRD names, and like it's like very sparsely populated with the actual usage. But maybe if KEP reviewers see it and can, enforce it, and we can educate, the SIG leads who are doing those reviews, a lot of them, that would be doable. I mean, I don't see I don't have an issue with it. I just my confidence level is low that it will be successful. David.
So just a question. I think this is a proposal to reflect the world as it is, not to pass a judgment on whether a name is good or is allowed or anything like that. So this would be a case of somebody provides, here is a name that is in use, and we say, yes, thank you, and merge the PR, as opposed to saying, you shouldn't have done that. No, you can't merge this.
Correct. I mean, first and foremost, reflect what is currently being used. We can find a bunch of them just by grepping around and by taking the human-oriented docs and importing those. Once we reach a sort of stasis, then if you as a reviewer see somebody adding a new name to a new context or something, you can say, hey, make sure you register this over in the database over there, where we can use the directory structure and owners to say, you know what, all of the API machinery names, they're approved by David, and so you can go and approve that PR yourself. Like it's not to impose central governance or like an architecture naming committee. It's more just to have it in a place where humans can go look for it, find some documentation on it, find which SIG owns it, and maybe understand, what am I supposed to put in the value of this annotation, right? Or I've seen this somewhere. What does it mean?
That sounds good. I like the idea. Thank you.
Also, we can use the metadata to generate docs.
I would like that as well.
Dims, you put your hand down. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, I'll go first, Sergey. Yeah, this is one of those, right? Like we want to do this, it's going to be incredibly useful for people, but then we can't keep it up to date. And like John was saying, at some point it'll fizzle out. So anything we can do to automate this, or anything we can do to like put it in front of people, like it could be like a step in the KEP process saying, hey, go update things in this repository.
It could
Whatever
be.
you're defining, yeah. So go do it there. So then it becomes like an automatic checkbox that people will have to go, hey, I need to go do a PR there before this gets approved, before the KEP gets approved or something like that. So
Yeah, it
anything
could be.
like that will be useful.
I was initially thinking of making it low impact and not putting it in the KEP template, but it certainly could be.
Okay. Yeah, and do you have people who can help with the initial upload of these things?
We have a page in our docs that has dozens of these things already registered. I know SF Tim, I don't know if he's here today, but he has taken it upon himself to remind people that they're supposed to be putting things into this doc. He scans through KEPs and PRs and stuff. So I've seen him do this enough times that I sort of preemptively volunteered him as a co-author or as an approver. But
will this help him do this better, or is
well,
it
I
going
don't
to
know.
make his life more difficult?
That's the question, right?
Yeah.
I would hope that we could generate the docs from this,
Yeah.
or we cross-reference them some other way. Like it seems like having a short, low impact place for people to register these things is important. The context that it came up in is there's a KEP around app protocol, service app protocol, which, if you don't dig in surface space, you never even deal with. But if you do, then you are aware that there's this thing and it's sort of semi-defined, and they want to define some Kubernetes owned names. And where do we write down which names we support, right?
Okay.
We don't have a place.
Okay. So is this does this have a lower threshold instead of 2 people LGTM approved? Can we just do one?
Depends on how we use it.
How you want to do this?
If we want to use it to generate docs, then we'd probably want somebody from SIG docs to make sure the description is good. If we're just going to use this as a sort of database that has, a short description and then a link to something, then it can just be delegated to SIG owners.
Okay.
Like I could approve anything with the network.kates.io name, right?
Yeah. Okay. Let's try it out.
Okay.
Yeah. Sounds good.
Sergey.
Yeah. My question is mostly about downstream components, and a couple examples here. Like Containerd is doing image annotation for pinned images, images that wouldn't be garbage collected. This is kind of like component specific downstream thing that will be used. And do we want to control those as well? Or, like, by control, I mean like know about and spread the knowledge about. And this is Containerd related, and CRI doesn't have the same annotation, so that may be a problematic point.
It's a good question. My initial answer is no. This is exclusively for things that the Kubernetes project lays claim to. If we want to extend that, if this is successful and we want to extend it to sister projects, I wouldn't be against that, but that's not where I'm starting.
Yeah, and opposite question about upstream. Like today we have CLI that knows about few conditions Node may have, but GKE, for instance, have more conditions that Node may have. Do we want to record those conditions somewhere in central place as well? Or again, it will be like, we know about these names and everything else beyond that is somebody else's responsibility. You cannot look it up here, even though it's Kubernetes.
It's also a good question, and I think it's the same answer. If this is successful, then we could make this available for other places to register their stuff here. But our efficacy there will be much lower because we can't require them to. And so, it's just not obvious that that's useful. I would hope every provider, actually, I hope that it would have happened by now. I would hope that every provider has a page that you can go to find all of their provider specific annotations and what they're used for and what they mean. But that hasn't really worked out, and nor has ours grown organically. So this is my attempt to inorganically bootstrap that.
Yeah, just a couple of days ago, somebody asked on Slack channel about this node controller annotation reporting that VM is paused instead of turned off. And I don't know which providers support it, which doesn't support. So yeah.
you know, whenever we have a scope of stuff like labels, right? We say anything that starts with kubernetes.io is as a label is ours, and nobody else should use it. That doesn't stop them from doing that. They have done that, and you know, whenever we find them, we should smack them and tell them not to do that. Likewise, we say, you know, app protocols that are not prefixed should be IANA standard names. And yet I know that at least 2 projects, GKE and Istio, happen to use non-prefixed names that use the same value and mean different things. And both of them are wrong. Neither of them should have used a non-prefixed name. And at least now we can go to the database and say, kates.io/h2 means this.
Yeah, I think we need to be very specific. What, like, if we define a name, we recommend to use this name, and sometimes providers may not use it. So
yes, all we can do is say that it's here and it has meaning, and if you use it, then other components will be able to use it, or to be able to recognize it. We can't force people to use it, and I don't plan to inject myself in like the code review process. Like, I'm not going to add a CI hook that greps for strings in Kubernetes PRs, at least not yet.
Okay, well, we're just about out of time, so let's just leave it there. And it sounds like Kim wants a co-conspirator, if anybody wants to jump in on that. And
I'll send a PR today.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you, everybody, and have a great couple of weeks. Get your caps done.
Bye, everyone.